So before Restore, my themes were mistrust and abandonment and rejection. I had grown up in a church that was primarily based on hiding women and teaching them to be seen and not heard, as well as hiding different types of abuses. And that stayed with me most of my childhood and adult life. That led me into relationships with men that did the same thing. I married into 2 different relationships that were both abusive, that both led to abandonment and rejection. And after that second marriage, I was done. I was done with God. I was done with trusting people, whether they were men, women, and even God at that point. I wanted nothing to do with it. So my relationships became very surfacey because I no longer trusted people, and I saw God as a male figure that I could no longer trust.
Before Restore, I was quiet and reserved. I chose to spend a lot of time in my nothing box. I did not show emotion. Growing up, I was taught that men do not show emotion. Prior to Restore, I thought that I was going to learn some marriage tips. And after I started, I learned it was going to be completely different.
So before Restore, I truly had come to believe that everything that had happened to me was of my own doing and that God was punishing me, even in my marriage relationships with men in general. And so I had decided that I was going to basically be in control of everything myself. That way, even if life was a mess, it was of my own doing and not caused by someone that I was in a relationship with. So basically, I began to look at life from a horizontal view and refused to look at life from a vertical view, because I honestly began to believe that God was the cause of all of my pain. As a matter of fact, there were times that people would ask me, "What did you do to make God angry?" And I began to believe that. During Restore, as I began to listen to other people's stories and as I began to see God's purpose in redemption after the fall, God began to move in my heart. And I realized that He really did want good things for me, and that it was the fall that caused pain and not Him, and that I could begin to trust again. And I began to feel Him move in my heart. And while I was uncertain of it all, I listened to other stories in our marriage group and realized that there could be relational healing in my brokenness.
As I started Restore, something changed. My emotions. I couldn't hold them in. I couldn't keep them down any longer. God was showing me that He was with me. Psalm 23 was one of the verses that really did help me out. He was showing me that He was always with me, and He was setting the groundwork with me to show me how to live my life.
I had become the queen of my own fortress without even realizing it, and I held people at arm's length. I would say that I trusted. It was during Restore Marriage that I realized I had done the same thing with God. I would go around doing my Christian things, reading my Bible, praying, loving others, but I wasn't abiding. It was during Restore Marriage I realized I was doing this with God, with my Christian relationships, and with my spouse. I wanted so badly to go deeper, but I was so afraid of being hurt again. During Restore Marriage, I began to open up as God allowed me to see that His love was what I needed to heal my heart. And I was scared. I was scared to open up. It was during this time that He gave me a verse in Romans 8 that talked about neither depth nor height nor any other creature would be able to separate me from the love of God. And that verse spoke to me so deeply. There was no amount of pain, no amount of hurt, and nothing I could do to chase God away from me. And there was no amount of pain that could keep Him from loving me. And it wasn't Him that had caused the pain to me, and I knew that I could go back to Him. So I figured that if He had brought my spouse into my life, that He was wanting me to see what a love like Christ was. So I had chosen during Restore to begin to open back up my heart to not only God, but even to the idea of having a relationship, what Jesus wanted it to look like, for me to love my spouse like Christ and to allow my spouse to love me like Christ. So I carefully opened up my heart, and it has been an experience that has opened up new avenues for me, as well as allowed me to learn how to abide in Christ instead of just going along with the daily motions.
As going through Restore Marriage, I was listening to the other couples share their stories. Listening to their stories and with words from the leaders, it helped me open up in communication with my wife, with the couples in Restore, and with our CG group. God has called me to live differently now. I will never be a extrovert, but now I am more of a participator instead of just a spectator.
I saw God begin to touch the most deep and vulnerable spots of my heart during Restore Marriage. And it was then that I realized and fully understood for the first time about creation and the fall and redemption. But for the first time, I understood consummation. And I was so excited to begin to take these steps and knew that God was calling me to live a life that didn't just look backwards and look back in my story and sit in the fall. So I was able to begin not only with my relationship with friends and with my spouse, but my relationship with Jesus began to have a hope and a future, and to be able to see my story as his story.